You were right. In fact, what we've been saying since Trump started using the tariff as more of a political cudgel than an emergency measures business was he's undermining his own argument for invoking the IEEPA as the basis for imposing tariffs. Supreme Court came down 6-3. I haven't really heard any, I would say reputable, I haven't really heard any lawyers disagree with the decision. As much as they don't like it, they don't disagree with it in law. 6-3, they said this was never intended to be the purpose of the IEEPA. For basically the same reasons we've been talking about for a while. They did not, specifically empower or specifically nudge Congress to go remedy this, but they did send one of the cases back for remand. They didn't specify what the remedy should be, but Trump has already started bypassing this particular decision, which prohibits using the IEE, which is the, emergencies. Oh, cripe, I always forget the
International Emergencies Act, basically.
So it was a economic emergency. He says going forward, you can't use this anymore. So the question is going to be, what do you do to ratify all of the tariffs already imposed and collected? And he's using other methods to bypass it going forward. Whether or not he ends up in front of the courts, we'll see. Your take on the decision and your take on what Trump is doing now to continue with the tariffs, adding another 10%, invoking other provisions of law to justify it.
Yeah, I mean, what we predicted became true because it became clear by summer that Trump was not sticking to the original script. The original script was that he was acting pursuant to, it was anchored and tethered, his tariff policy, to industrial policy for the U.S. related to the economic emergency as well. There was a separate set of tariffs on the drug trade, but principally and primarily on the economic emergency created by trade deficits leading to the deindustrialization of the United States, which was not only having economic and social and community harm throughout what used to be the industrial heartland, which we now call the Rust Belt for a reason, and that these policies were designed and had a nexus to that. Excuse me. So that's how he started out, and then he abandoned it by summer with the advice of Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. There's various stories out there. The Cantor Fitzgerald has denied that they were Lutnick's company and his kids were allegedly what's known is that they were out there saying that they were going to be buying up the tariff refunds for dimes on the dollar and that they could make billions of dollars if the Supreme Court invalidated the tariffs. They claim they didn't do it. All we have is their claim they didn't do it because we know that they were pitching it to clients in the summer.
No, I pulled up. Yeah, but I pulled up at least a couple of articles confirming that they had at least issued one market, which was $10 million, give or take. But let's just answer this one question, because people are going to say this is corruption. It's Lutnick's family. It's his kids who are now the directors of Cantor Fitzgerald. Lutnick is no longer involved. Whatever blind trust, whatever he set up. Who cares? They were buying up from companies who paid the tariffs. They said, look, you might get them back if they invalidate the tariffs. We'll buy it up for 20% or 30%. And here's, if you've spent 10 million on tariffs, here's 2 million, my apologies, and take that money and run, and we'll worry about getting the refund if and when. Now that the Supreme Court said it's invalid, in theory, they get to claim this refund. But from what Trump's done, first of all, I'd say that doesn't smell like corruption, because it smells like they're betting against the administration because of a policy decision. But from what Trump's done, they're not getting the refunds anyhow. So they would have lost on that bet.
They are. Those refunds are coming. They can drag it out in litigation a little while, a year or two, but those refunds are coming. And what he's done is really a very temporary fix, and the law he's using doesn't quite fit what he's trying to do either. So but basically Lutnick advised him and Bessent advised him and Rubio advised him to use tariffs like substitute sanctions policies. And what we said at the time, I said there was a legal argument to defend his use of the statute until he started doing this. And I pointed out at the time here, we pointed out on the Duran with others, that this would backfire with the Supreme Court. And they use the words, quote, Trump claims under the statute that he can unilaterally impose unbounded change in tariffs at will. They said that a half dozen times. What we predicted is exactly what they did and why they did it. This was a monumental mistake by the president because he continued to take the advice of rogue actors like Lutnick, who I have no doubt was at some level his family profiting from this. It was, imagine you're sitting there giving advice to the president saying, yeah, go for it. Yeah, you should do it for this and that. Use it because Canada ran an ad you don't like. Use it because we want to take down Russia and help Ukraine. Use it because we want to take down Iran and help Israel. Use it for all these reasons that have nothing at all to do with industrial policy, nothing at all to do with the statutes authorizing it. And while telling his kids, hey, go out there and buy those refunds for 10 cents on the dollar because you're going to cash in big. Family's going to get rich. This is the man who, miraculously managed to not show up at his offices on 9/11 in the World Trade Center building. This is the man who lied repeatedly, flagrantly about being in the Epstein files and his relationship to Jeffrey Epstein. Lutnick was a guy who raised money for Hillary Rotten Clinton in 2016. So, the idea that this guy should have the influence he has, this should have been the last straw. His bad advice led to Trump's signature tariff policy being scrapped. And now the federal government being on the, having to owe anywhere from $175 to $200 billion in refunds this next year, creating a budgetary crisis for the president. So it all because he ignored the advice that that those of us who have long championed this trade. Lutnick's never been a protectionist. Lutnick's never been an industrial policy guy. He comes from Wall Street. Those of us that have been in this for a long, long time knew what statutes and authority he could use, knew how to go about it, and pitched it, and he ignored us in exchange because he just loved the power. Oh, I don't like what you said, 5% tariff. I don't like what you said, 22% tariff. That was going to destroy his credibility in the court, and that's exactly what happened.
People are going to say it's not Lutnick's fault because if Trump picked him and Trump relies on him, it's Trump's fault. It was Lutnick's economic advice to use these tariffs in the way Trump was doing it. Let me ask you this.
No doubt about that. He's out there. He's bragged about this as a commerce secretary. And as soon as the story broke that his kids were betting the other way, that should have been a massive red flag. To my knowledge, nothing was done about that because everybody around the president is just cashing in. They're treating it like a personal self-enrichment scheme. The Trump administration is going to go down as more corrupt than the Grant second term if he doesn't reverse course quickly. So now to get into the legal issues, how they decided, it was a 3-3-3 split. 3 justices of the 3 liberal Democrats said the statute didn't authorize it. The 3, Roberts, Gorsuch, and Barrett was always probably going to go along with whatever Roberts did. They said that in addition, not only did the statute not authorize it, the statute couldn't because of the major questions doctrine. This is what struck down the Chevron doctrine. I'm a big fan of their use of it. The 3, Kavanaugh, Thomas, and Alito dissented because they believe the statute did authorize it. And it was within the delegatory power of Congress. So for those that don't, the fundamentals, there's zero doubt that tariff power constitutionally is only given to Congress. It's not given to anybody else. There's nobody disputes that. The question became whether or not Congress had and constitutionally could delegate that authority to the president. And there were past Supreme Court cases going back a century where the Supreme Court had said, yes, you could constitutionally delegate tariff power to the president. And then the question was, did they? And he used the most aggressive statute that had the broadest range of authority, so there was always risk. This statute, the emergency statute, doesn't have the word tariff in it, and had never been used for tariffs ever. So those were the hurdles. That's why he had to strictly hew and anchor and tether his entire tariff policy to the policy intentions of that statute, because he was already a reach to try to get Supreme Court approval for it under those terms. The argument is that the emergency statute is so broad, it says he can completely ban the importation and he can regulate the importation. And if you can ban something, if you can regulate it, why couldn't you tariff it? That's the argument Thomas made. That's the argument I said they could make as long as they tethered it to that policy. Trump abandoned that. Now he called in as John Barron to C-SPAN, apparently, on the day of the decision, pretending to be John Barron again. So there's John Barron from Virginia, and it's so obviously Trump. Oh, it was a terrible decision. What does it the people? Poor Mr. President Trump. He did that whole thing, which is funny as a Dickens. But that's why this happened. And so at this point, my view is Congress did effectively delegate to the president broad authority over tariffs through the Emergencies Act, as long as it was the economic emergency being used to justify the tariff. If it was untethered, then I agree with the decision. That those aspects of the decision that reference him not tethering, not anchoring his tariff policy to the specific statutory delegation did make it unconstitutional for what he did. And some of us kept warning and warning and warning. Just ignore it. Keeps taking the wrong advice from the wrong people. It's his own fault for taking that advice. But at some point, you'd think the Epstein files blows up in your face. These foreign policy adventures are blowing up in your face. Now the tariff policy blows up in your face. At what point do you wake up that maybe you're getting bad advice, Mr. President? Or do you just want to go down with that ship? Now, we were already in the field. 1776 Law Center already had a survey out on this topic, and it provides some positive policy prescriptions that he can utilize. And there was someone on our locals board that was on X kept telling me, Massey's got to do this. Massey's got to do it. It's not Massey's policy. It's Trump's policy. He has to go through Congress, right? I mean, Kavanaugh said in his dissent, there's other statutes. Those statutes are very limited, very restricted. You have to go through administrative finding. There's 150-day durations on it. It's not even clear whether you can use the balance of payments one, given the current currency structuring that we have. So you look at all those issues, those don't provide the solution. What does provide a potential solution is something we poll tested and has a plus 20 approval rating with. And amongst key swing voters, a plus 30 approval rating with. Broad approval amongst everybody that's not a boomer for the most part. And the simple policy is continue your tariff policy, which has primarily as its objective national security and industrial policy to rebuild American manufacturing to be independently sourced in the United States. It also provides good paying jobs that help support strong families and strong communities. So the Rust Belt is no longer the Rust Belt, but is the building belt of the American economy. But you need to offer a sweetener to get it through Congress. And the sweetener that we propose is one Trump himself has flirted with because we've been proposing it now to him for 2 years. But this time we went out and poll tested it to show its support, which is you eliminate entirely the individual income tax on households that make less than $250,000 a year. You basically take 95% of American households and remove them entirely from the individual income tax system. The people have this mistake. I had people saying, oh, that couldn't possibly be funded by tariffs. Yes, a 20% tariff would bring in about $750 billion because of how much global imports. People don't understand how many foreign imports we get. And the Trump's tariffs were hit or miss all over the place. The reason why they haven't raised anywhere near that amount of revenue is because they were this rate, this time. I mean, it was all over. If you just have our original industrial policy, what was called the American Plan by Alexander Hamilton, was that you need to have uniform tariffs, because otherwise you get into all the reason why we tariff Penguin Island is because you hop over here and you bring it up. You need to avoid all those problems by, if it's coming in from a foreign producer, across the board, flat 20%. Pat Buchanan recommended a 25% rate. And the way you get American buy-in, the way you make this popular, you should announce at the State of the Union on Tuesday, is you come in and say, see, the dog even loves it. Is you come in and you say that all Americans are no longer going to pay the individual income tax. You don't have to worry about the no tax on tips and on the limitations of that, the no tax on retirement, and so many of those no tax on tips, overtime, and Social Security got watered down by the Senate. It's going to agitate a bunch of voters coming up when they start filling out their returns and they don't see the refunds they think are coming. Well, best way around all of that, they also try to tax gamblers. That created a whole bunch of problems by not letting them take their losses as deductions and all that kind of thing. You could solve all that in one clean swoop. Just eliminate the individual income tax for 95% of American households and pay for it with tariffs, like we have been doing since the founding of the country until the 1920s. When they originally passed the income tax, they said, don't worry, this tax will not tax the hair on a working man's head. Mm-hmm. This is what working men's heads look like now. So my advice is, and we looked at it, it's plus 20 approval rating, and amongst people that are swing voters, plus 30, amongst anybody under the age of 65, plus 30, under Black and Hispanic voters, plus 25, plus 30, plus 35, independent swing voters, plus 30, plus 35. This is massively popular. So this is his solution. Put Congress in a position where they have to love foreign imports so much that they're willing to stick 95% of Americans with a tax bill next year. That's going to be a very difficult the turning it down from those in the House and the Senate. Now they may do it anyway, but then Trump's got an issue he's running on. He's reunited back to his political base. It basically would shift the income tax burden in America to foreign goods, millionaires, and billionaires. It takes away the whole Democratic argument that he's just doing favoritism for the rich people, that he's the Epstein class representative. There's nobody in the Epstein class that makes less than $250,000 a year. So this is a political winner. It's a policy winner. It protects his industrial policy. It protects the national security ramifications of that industrial policy. And it's the one that can work, given that this strategy by Bondi, also they advocated poorly for it, frankly, before the Supreme Court. That was the other reason why I knew it was going to go nowhere, because down deep, Bondi doesn't support this either.
I pulled up your tweet from the day of the hearings. You said it's dead in the water. Bet no against. Bet yes that they're going to strike it down. But they didn't order the reimbursement in the order. They didn't issue that as one of the directives. They didn't. They said it would be a mess.
But they didn't say no, and they didn't give the carve out. So the option was they could have said Congress can retroactively do that. They didn't. What that means is they afforded some time for the administration to contest it, the refund litigation, but they're going to owe that $200 billion sometime over the next 18.
Not to play devil's advocate, just ask the obvious question. Congress doesn't need that blessing from the Supreme Court. They can just go out and retroactively ratify those tariffs. Anyhow, the question is going to be, I don't know what. Well, first of all, that's the first question. They don't need the blessing from the Supreme Court. Congress can retroactively ratify those tariffs, correct?
In all likelihood. It's a little bit tricky, but if they imposed a 20% tariff across the board, that would be, and they even made it retroactive to some degree. Whether they could or not, that part's up in the air. But that would solve a lot of the problems and would immediately solve the funding issue. But then without a problem.
The question is this: I don't know what the balance of power is that would allow that to go through. Assume Democrats want this to sink the economy. They want it to hurt Trump, and so would Democrats not support retroactive ratification?
They may not support it at all, but then they're the ones out there saying they want to protect foreign goods that are undermining American producers, and they want to tax 95% of Americans at the current income tax rates. That's a political winner for the midterms for Republicans. That's not a winner for Democrats. So that you put them in a position. I mean, overwhelmingly Democrats support this bill, or independents who lean Democratic demographics. So the idea that there's very few people that are sitting around other than millionaires. I guess they complain that they're not part of this. Well, sorry, Tom Woods pointed out, Barnes, I'm in the top 10%. Well, if you do this right, you get it's only the top 5%. But right now, the top 1% own more American wealth than the entire middle class combined, than the middle 60% of the country combined. That's not a good position to be in long term. If you are super wealthy, you do not want to be in a out of whack economy that's going to encourage a lot of people to take away that wealth in ways that you don't want to happen. So, this would be a massive. And again, you can avoid paying the tariff. Even for, I think there's issues with claiming that there's a dollar for dollar transfer between tariffs and the price of the goods. Most of the time, the foreign producer eats a good portion of it. The importer eats a good portion of it. The retailer eats a good portion of it. But even if it was dollar for dollar, you can avoid this, unlike the income tax. You can avoid this by not buying foreign goods. That's why. Buy American. It creates an incentive. And now at some point that may have revenue impact, but you can adjust accordingly. Again, folks, we did that. People are like, oh, this can't be done, Barnes. It's how we founded our country for over 100 years. This is how we did it. For almost a century and a half. And I'll be like, oh, no, it's not possible. Yes, it is possible.
But let me ask you this. So Congress they don't need the Supreme Court's blessing to retroactively ratify the tariffs. If they push for that, Democrats oppose it because they want to burn the whole ship down. Then the Republicans can use that as a political, a talking point for the midterms. If the administration readily and without coercion reimburses these tariffs, can we then assume that there's a certain degree of tacit corruption? Overt corruption with acting in a way that would seemingly benefit Cantor Fitzgerald and Lutnick's two kids?
Yeah, it'll be something to watch. It's just you can't bring in a bunch of Wall Street bros and not expect them to be corporate hosts. It's that simple.